404. A daughter who revives her family. Chu Zhang, a native of Shaanxi, couldn't recall his exact district or county. During a year marked by chaotic warfare, he was captured by marauders. Left behind were his two young sons, Chu Fu and Chu Lu, under the care of his second wife, Mrs. Shao. She struggled to support the children with the small legacy left by Chu Zhang. Amid the turmoil, natural disasters and human conflicts persisted, compounded by the oppression of the powerful local families, leaving the widow and her children in extreme hardship. Chu Zhang's uncle, Chu Shanglian, saw an opportunity to take over Chu Zhang's modest inheritance. He pressured Mrs. Shao to remarry, but she steadfastly refused. Chu Shanglian then plotted to sell her to a wealthy family without her knowledge. In the same village lived Wei Ming, a cunning and deceitful man who bore a grudge against the Chu family. He spread malicious rumors about Mrs. Shao, tarnishing her reputation. Hearing these rumors, the wealthy family decided against buying her, leaving Chu Shanglian's plan in disarray. At the time, Chu Fu was only 16. With no one to help them at home, a hasty marriage was arranged for him. His new wife, Mrs. Jiang, the daughter of a scholar, was virtuous and capable. She took over the household responsibilities, gradually improving their living conditions. This allowed Chu Lu to pursue his studies. Jealous of the Chu family's improving circumstances, Wei Ming devised another plan. He pretended to befriend Chu Fu, often inviting him for drinks. Fooled by Wei Ming's false friendship, Chu Fu began to view him as a close friend. Wei Ming planted seeds of discord, suggesting to Chu Fu that he should demand a family split to secure his own wealth, leaving his mother and younger brother in poverty. Chu Fu, influenced by Wei Ming, demanded the family split, leading to a bitter argument with his mother. His anger fueled reckless spending of the family's resources. Wei Ming then lured Chu Fu into gambling, depleting the family's supplies. When Mrs. Jiang discovered this, she was afraid to inform Mrs. Shao. Eventually, the family ran out of food, and Mrs. Shao learned of Chu Fu's gambling. Although furious, she had no choice but to agree to the family split. Mrs. Jiang continued to care for her mother-in-law daily. After the split, Chu Fu's gambling spiraled out of control, leading to the loss of all their land and assets. With no money left, he considered using his wife to borrow more funds but couldn't find a lender. He then turned to Zhao Yanwang, a local bandit, who lent him money without concern for potential deceit. Chu Fu lost the money quickly and, fearing Zhao's wrath, tricked his wife into going to Zhao's house and handed her over. Wei Ming, pleased with the outcome, informed the Jiang family, hoping to incite conflict. The Jiang family was outraged and took legal action, forcing Chu Fu to flee. Mrs. Jiang, upon realizing her husband's betrayal, wished for death. Zhao Yanwang's attempts to console or threaten her were in vain. In desperation, she attempted to end her life but was saved, albeit severely injured. The local official, learning of the incident, summoned Zhao Yanwang and, after inspecting Mrs. Jiang's injuries, ordered Zhao to be punished. The guards hesitated, but the official, furious and determined, had Zhao beaten to death. Mrs. Shao, upon hearing of her son's actions, was devastated and fell gravely ill. Chu Lu, only 15, was left with no one to depend on. Meanwhile, Chu Zhang's daughter from his first marriage, Da Niang, married and lived in a distant county. Known for her strong personality, she often clashed with her family, leading to estrangement. Upon learning of her family's plight, Da Niang returned with her young son. Seeing her brother caring for their stepmother in such dire circumstances, she felt deep sorrow and anger. When she asked about Chu Fu, Chu Lu recounted the recent tragic events, leaving Da Niang momentarily speechless with rage. After a while, she said, "With no adult male in charge at home, allowing people to bully us to this extent. As for our family's land, how dare those rascals try to cheat us out of it?" With that, she went into the kitchen, started a fire, cooked food, and first let her mother eat before calling her younger brother and her son to eat together. After eating, Da Niang left the house in anger and went straight to the county office to file a complaint, accusing the gamblers of enticing Chu Fu into gambling and cheating the family out of their property. When the gamblers heard about this, they became frightened and pooled their money to bribe Da Niang to drop the charges. However, Da Niang accepted the money, but still pursued the lawsuit. The county magistrate then apprehended the gamblers and gave them a punishment before letting them go, without further investigation into the land dispute. NIANG, feeling outraged, took her case to the prefectural government. The prefect detested gambling, and upon hearing NIANG's impassioned plea, detailing the suffering of her orphaned mother and the deceitful actions of the gamblers, he was deeply moved. He ordered the county magistrate to return the land to the Chu family and to punish Chu Fu severely as a deterrent to other wayward sons. Upon returning home, NIANG found that the county magistrate had received orders from the prefect and had already begun apprehending the gamblers again, rigorously investigating the matter. Eventually, they managed to reclaim all the land that Chu Fu had lost through gambling. After being widowed for a long time, NIANG sent her younger son back home and instructed him to work diligently with his brother and not to come back again. From then on, NIANG lived in her parents' home, caring for her stepmother, teaching her younger brother, and managing everything in an orderly manner. Her stepmother was greatly relieved, her health gradually improved, and she entrusted all the household affairs to NIANG. Whenever the ruffians in the village dared to bully the Chu family, NIANG would confront them with a knife, speaking boldly and logically, and they would always submit. Over the course of more than a year, the family's wealth increased day by day. NIANG also frequently bought medicines and food to send to Mrs. Jiang. As she saw Chu Lu gradually growing up, she often urged matchmakers to find him a wife. Despite Wei Ming's scheming, he persisted in spreading rumors, saying, "All of the Chu family's property has been taken over by NIANG. It's unlikely they'll ever get it back." People believed this, so no one was willing to marry their daughters to Chu Lu. There was a gentleman named Fan Ziwen, whose family owned a famous garden, one of the best in Shaanxi. The garden was adorned with numerous precious flowers and plants, lining both sides of the path that led all the way to the inner chambers of the Fan family. Once, a man unknowingly walked through the garden, unaware that it belonged to the Fan family, and ended up entering the inner chambers just as Fan Ziwen was hosting a banquet. The Fan family, enraged at this intrusion, seized the man, accusing him of being a robber and nearly punishing him severely. On the day of the Qingming festival, Chu Lu was returning from his private school when he ran into Wei Ming. Wei Ming pretended to play with him and gradually led him near the Fan family's garden. Wei Ming had a good relationship with the gardener of the garden, so the gardener let them in. The two of them wandered through the pavilions and terraces in the garden. Eventually, they arrived at a place where a small stream rushed by in the distance. Spanning the stream was a painted bridge with vermilion railings on both sides, leading to a large red gate. From afar, they could see a cluster of flowers inside the gate, which turned out to be Fan Ziwen's inner chambers. Wei Ming deceived Chu Lu, saying, "You go in first, I need to use the restroom." Chu Lu believed him and crossed the bridge, entering through the red gate into a courtyard where he heard the laughter of women. As he paused in surprise, a maid came out, saw Chu Lu, and immediately ran away. Chu Lu suddenly realized his mistake. He had unwittingly entered someone else's inner chambers, and he was horrified as he hastily fled. At that moment, Fan Ziwen also came out and shouted for his servants to chase after Chu Lu. Feeling extremely embarrassed, Chu Lu panicked and jumped into the stream. Seeing this, Fan Ziwen's anger suddenly turned to laughter, and he ordered his servants to rescue Chu Lu from the water. Upon seeing Chu Lu's handsome and elegant appearance, Fan Ziwen instructed his servants to help him change out of his wet clothes and shoes. Then he led Chu Lu into a pavilion and asked for his name. Fan Ziwen's demeanor was friendly and gentle, making Chu Lu feel at ease. After chatting for a while, Fan Ziwen walked into the inner chambers and then came out again, smiling as he shook Chu Lu's hand and led him back across the bridge, approaching the courtyard they had just left. Chu Lu was puzzled and hesitant, afraid to enter. However, Fan Ziwen insisted and pulled him into the courtyard, where a beautiful woman was peeking at them from behind the flowers and bamboo fence. After they sat down, the maidservants brought out wine. Chu Lu declined, saying, "I was young and ignorant, and I mistakenly entered your inner chambers. I am grateful for your forgiveness, and I only wish for you to let me go home soon, for which I will be deeply thankful." But Fan Ziwen refused to listen. Before long, the table was filled with dishes, and Chu Lu once again declined, saying he had already eaten and drunk enough. However, Fan Ziwen insisted, saying with a smile, "I have a musical instrument name, and if you come up with a suitable answer, I'll let you go." Chulu eagerly agreed, asking him to proceed. Fan Ziwen said, "The musical instrument name is Hunbu Si." After pondering for a while, Chulu finally replied, "Silver coagulates to form Mei Nai He." Fan Ziwen burst into laughter and exclaimed, "You truly are Shi Chong." Chulu, however, was even more confused by this response. It turned out that Fan Ziwen had a daughter named Huiniang, who was not only beautiful but also knowledgeable in poetry and literature. Fan Ziwen thought about finding a good husband for her daughter every day. One night, Huiniang dreamed that someone told her, "Shi Chong is your husband." When she asked where, the answer was, "He will fall into the water tomorrow." When she woke up in the morning, she told her parents, and they all felt amazed. Chulu happened to match the dream of Huiniang, so Fan Ziwen invited him into the inner chambers to let his wife, Huiniang, and the maidservants take a look at him. When Fan Ziwen heard Chulu's coincidental matching verse, he liked it and said with joy, "The game using the name of this musical instrument was created by my daughter. I couldn't recall the right name for a long time, but now that you've guessed it correctly, it must be fate. I want to marry my daughter to you. We have plenty of room in our house, so there's no need for you to go through the trouble of preparing a bride's house in your family. You just need to come to our house empty-handed." Chulu hesitantly declined, saying his mother was sick in bed, so he didn't dare to marry into another family. Fan Ziwen then let him go back first and discuss with his family, so he sent servants to bring Chulu's wet clothes and let him ride back home on a horse. Chulu returned home and told his mother about the matter. His mother was very surprised and thought it was ominous. From this incident, Shaoxi realized how troublesome Wei Ming was. However, as a blessing in disguise, she didn't want to hold a grudge against him, but she warned her son not to associate with him anymore. After a few days, Fan Ziwen sent someone to pass a message to Chulu's mother again. Although his mother still dared not agree, NIANG took the initiative to accept it and immediately sent 2 matchmakers to deliver the betrothal gifts. Soon after, Chulu married into Fan Ziwen's family. In just over a year, he passed the imperial examination and gained quite a reputation. Later, when his younger brother-in-law grew up, he treated Chulu with disrespect. Out of anger, Chulu returned to his own family with his wife. At this time, his mother could already walk with the help of a cane. Depending on NIANG every year to manage the household, the family's house was also spacious and well-maintained. After Chulu's wife moved in, they also brought along many servants and maids, making the Chu family look like a wealthy family. Wei Ming, failing once again, became even more envious of the Chu family. He resented not being able to find any leverage against them. So, he bribed a Han slave who had escaped from under the banner's jurisdiction to falsely accuse Chulu of being an accomplice in smuggling. At the time of the Qing dynasty's establishment, the laws against escaped banner slaves were particularly harsh. Consequently, Chulu was sentenced to exile and sent to the frontier. Fan Ziwen used his influence to only save Huiniang from exile, while all of Chulu's property was confiscated by the authorities. Fortunately, NIANG, armed with the original division of property document, stepped forward and argued with the officials. She explained that several acres of new farmland were registered under Chu Fu's name, not Chulu's, so they should not be confiscated. This allowed her and her daughter to have a place to live. Realizing that he might never return from exile, Chulu wrote a divorce decree and sent it to his father-in-law's house before leaving alone for the frontier. Chulu had barely been gone for a few days when he arrived in the capital and stopped at an inn for a meal. By chance, he saw a beggar outside the window staring at him blankly, bearing a striking resemblance to his brother Chu Fu. Chulu hurriedly approached and confirmed that it was indeed his brother. Chulu then recounted his own misfortunes, and the 2 brothers were filled with sorrow and grief. Chulu untied his inner garment, took out a few ounces of silver, and handed them to his brother, instructing him to return home. Chu Fu tearfully accepted the money, and the 2 brothers parted ways. Upon reaching the frontier, Chulu was assigned to serve as a servant under a general's tent. Because of his delicate appearance, the general tasked him with managing documents and ledgers, and he lodged and ate with the other servants. When the other servants asked about his background, Chulu explained in detail. One of them suddenly exclaimed, "You are my son!" After being captured by the marauders, Chu Zhang was initially tasked with herding horses for them. Later, when this band of marauders surrendered to the imperial army, Chu Zhang was sold to the Banner people as a slave. At this time, he was encamped with his master on the frontier. Chu Zhang recounted his past to Chu Lu, and everyone present realized that the two were indeed father and son. Overwhelmed with emotion, Chu Zhang and Chu Lu couldn't help but weep bitterly, and everyone in the room was moved to tears. In a fit of anger, Chu Zhang exclaimed, "Where did this runaway slave come from to deceive and falsely accuse my son?" He then went to the general and tearfully recounted the whole story. Upon hearing this, the general appointed Chu Lu as a scribe and wrote a letter to a king in the capital, instructing Chu Zhang to present it to him. When Chu Zhang entered the capital and waited for the prince's carriage to emerge, he cried out his grievances and presented the letter from the general. Upon learning the truth, the prince expressed great sympathy for Chu Lu's plight. He ordered the local officials to redress the injustice for him, return the confiscated property to the Chu family, declare Chu Lu innocent, and release him to return home. Upon returning to the frontier, father and son were overjoyed to be reunited. Chu Lu asked his father if he had remarried in these years in order to help him redeem himself and return to their hometown. Learning that Chu Zhang had married twice but had no children and was still alone, Chu Lu prepared his belongings and set off for home on his own. Initially, Chu Fu bid farewell to his brother and returned to their hometown. Upon entering the house, he knelt before his mother. NIANG served their mother, who was seated in the main hall while holding a stick, and asked Chu Fu, "If you're willing to accept punishment, you can stay here. Otherwise, your property is long gone and there's no place for you to eat here. You may leave." Chu Fu knelt on the ground, crying, expressing his willingness to accept punishment. Hearing this, NIANG threw the stick to the ground and said, "Someone who abandons his family isn't worth beating, but you still have unresolved issues. If you offend again, you should surrender to the authorities." She then sent someone to inform Mrs. Jiang, Chu Fu's wife, of his return. Mrs. Jiang angrily retorted, "What am I to the Chu family? Do I need to be informed?" NIANG then relayed Chu Fu's wife's words to him, intentionally humiliating him. Chu Fu felt extremely ashamed and dared not show his face. After 6 months, although NIANG provided Chu Fu with food, clothing, and shelter meticulously, she continued to treat him like a servant. Chu Fu, on the other hand, labored tirelessly without complaint. Sometimes he was given money to run errands, and he became meticulous in keeping track of expenses. NIANG observed that he had indeed changed for the better, so she told her mother and went to beg Chu Fu's wife to return. The mother thought it might not be appropriate to reconcile. However, NIANG insisted, saying, "No, she wouldn't have suffered so much if she had agreed to marry someone else back then. She's just too angry to let go." Therefore, NIANG personally took her brother and went to Chu Fu's wife's family to apologize. When Chu Fu's wife's parents saw Chu Fu, they scolded him severely. NIANG ordered him to kneel in front of his in-laws to apologize before inviting Chu Fu's wife out to meet them. Despite being asked 3 or 4 times, Chu Fu's wife refused to come out. NIANG searched for her and forcibly brought her in front of Chu Fu. Chu Fu's wife then scolded him harshly. Chu Fu was sweating profusely and felt extremely embarrassed. Chu Fu's wife's mother finally ordered him to stand up. NIANG took this opportunity to ask Chu Fu's wife when she planned to return. Chu Fu's wife said, "In the past, I received too much kindness from my sister. Now that you ask me to return, how can I refuse? But I'm afraid I can't guarantee that I won't be mistreated again. Moreover, I have no more affection for him. How can I live with someone who has hurt me so much? Please prepare another room for me. I'll go back to take care of my mother, which is better than becoming a nun. That would satisfy me." NIANG quickly explained that Chu Fu had truly repented, promised to come back the next day to take her home and bid farewell before leaving. The next day, NIANG prepared a splendid carriage to bring back Chu Fu's wife. The mother was already waiting at the door, and when she saw Chufu's wife, she knelt down in front of her. Chufu's wife also hurriedly knelt down, bursting into tears. NIANG quickly tried to console them. Then, a feast was prepared to celebrate Chufu's wife's return, with Chufu seated at one side of the table. After a while, NIANG lifted her wine cup and said, "In the past, I worked hard to build up the family's wealth for the Chu family, not for my own benefit. Now, my younger brother has repented, and his virtuous wife has returned. I will immediately hand over all the family accounts. I came empty-handed, and I will leave empty-handed." Upon hearing this, Chufu and his wife quickly got up from their seats, kneeling beside them, tearfully begging her not to leave, and NIANG relented. Before long, the official order for Chulu's exoneration was issued. In just a few days, all the land that had been confiscated by the government was returned. Wei Ming was greatly astonished and couldn't figure out the reason. Frustrated and furious, he found an opportunity when the western neighbor of the Chu family suffered a fire. Wei Ming pretended to help put out the fire, but secretly used a bundle of grass to set fire to Chufu's house. With a strong wind blowing at the time, the fire spread rapidly and almost completely burned down the Chu family's house, leaving only 2 or 3 rooms where Chufu lived. The whole family had to move into these few rooms. Not long after, Chulu returned home and the whole family reunited, experiencing both sorrow and joy. Initially, when Fan Gongzi received Chulu's divorce document, he took it to discuss with Hui Niang. Seeing her daughter in tears, she tore the document to pieces and threw it on the ground. Fan Gongzi then acquiesced to his daughter's wishes and did not force her to remarry. When Chulu returned and learned that Hui Niang had not remarried, he was overjoyed and hurried to his in-laws' house. Knowing about the fire that had struck their house, Fan Gongzi wanted to keep Chulu there, but he declined and returned home. Fortunately, NIANG had saved up some money over the years, and she used it all to renovate the dilapidated house. One day, while Chufu was working with a shovel, he accidentally dug up a gold furnace. That night, he and his brother opened it together, only to find a stone-built gold furnace measuring about 10 feet square, filled with silver. With this silver, the Chu family summoned craftsmen and embarked on a massive construction project, building a magnificent and splendid mansion that rivaled those of wealthy families. After returning home, Chulu was grateful to the general for his help in times of crisis. He prepared 1,000 taels of silver and intended to visit the general to express his gratitude and, incidentally, to ransom his father. Chufu volunteered to go in place of his younger brother, so he sent several sturdy servants to accompany him to the outskirts. Chulu also brought back Hui Niang. Soon after, Chufu brought their father back, and the whole family rejoiced. Since NIANG had been living at her maternal home, she had prohibited her sons from visiting her, fearing that people would gossip about her attempting to take over the Chu family's property. Now that their father had returned, she insisted on leaving and returning home. Unable to bear it, the brothers persuaded their father to divide the family property into 3 parts, 2 for the sons and 1 for the daughter. NIANG tried to decline, but both brothers tearfully insisted, saying, "If not for our sister, where would we be today?" Reluctantly, NIANG accepted and sent someone to fetch her sons to move back home where they would live together with their parents. Someone asked NIANG, "Chufu and Chulu are your half-brothers. Why do you care for them so much?" NIANG replied, "I only know about having a mother, not about having a father. Only beasts would behave otherwise. How could a person imitate that?" Chufu and Chulu were deeply moved by her words and shed tears of gratitude. They had the craftsmen renovate NIANG's house to match their own. Subsequently, Wei Ming reflected on himself. Over the past decade, the more harm he caused to the Chu family, the more blessings he seemed to bring upon them. He gradually regretted his actions and admired the wealth of the Chu family, so he wanted to reconcile with them. Using the pretext of celebrating Chuzhong's return home, he prepared gifts and went to the Chu family. Chufu wanted to drive him away, but Chuzhong, unwilling to offend his goodwill, accepted the gifts of live chickens and wine. The chickens, tied with cloth strips around their feet, accidentally ran into the kitchen and caught fire from the cloth. They then nested in the firewood pile in the kitchen, but the servants paid no heed. Eventually, the fire spread from the kitchen to the rest of the house. The family panicked when the fire broke out, but thankfully, with many hands, they managed to extinguish it before too much damage was done. However, everything in the kitchen had turned to ashes. Both Chufu and Chulu felt that the gifts sent by Wei Ming were ominous. Later, when it was their father's birthday, Wei Ming brought a sheep as a congratulatory gift. The Chu family tried to decline, but they had no choice and temporarily tied the sheep to a tree in the courtyard. At night, a young servant, who had been beaten by other servants earlier, angrily went to the tree, untied the sheep, and hanged himself. Chufu and Chulu lamented, "He treated our family kindly, but it's better to harm us instead." From then on, although Wei Ming was very attentive, the Chu brothers dared not accept anything from him, and instead sought to repay him generously. As Wei Ming grew old and his family fell into poverty, he resorted to begging. Despite this, the Chu family still often provided him with cloth and food to help him. Yishi said, "Oh my, the Creator often does not comply with human wishes. The more one tries to harm others, the happier those others become. Those cunning and deceitful individuals are truly boring. They may appear to be respected and admired by others, but ultimately bring disasters upon themselves. Isn't that even more peculiar?" From this, it can be understood that the water from the thief's spring brings misfortune to those who come near it.